The cold settled into Amir's bones long before the night fully arrived. It wasn't just the winter air biting through his worn-out jacket. It was something deeper, something that had been building quietly for months. By the time the city lights flickered to life and the streets began to glow with Christmas decorations, he was already numb. At 32, Amir stood at the edge of a life that no longer felt like his own. The world around him seemed to move, with purpose, cars rushing past, families laughing, strangers carrying brightly wrapped gifts. But he stood still, like a shadow no one noticed. Once, he had walked these same streets with confidence, with plans, with a future that felt certain. Now, every step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself was asking him why he was still trying. The bus stop stood just ahead, illuminated by a flickering streetlight. A few people had gathered there, bundled up, their breath visible in the cold air. Amir slowed his pace, his eyes drifting toward the glowing sign that displayed the final route of the night, the last bus home. Home. The word felt unfamiliar, almost hollow. What was waiting for him there? A dim room. Silence. The same unanswered questions echoing off the walls. He had stopped calling it home weeks ago, though he never said it out loud. It was just a place he returned to because there was nowhere else to go. The bus arrived with a low hiss, its doors opening like an invitation he didn't want. People stepped forward quickly, eager to escape the cold. Amir stood a few feet away, watching them climb aboard one by one. A mother guiding her child, a man checking his phone, a couple laughing softly, sharing warmth he could almost feel from where he stood. He didn't move. For a brief moment, his body urged him forward. Just take the step, just get on. But something inside him held him back. A quiet resistance, a question he couldn't answer. Why go back? The driver glanced at him, waiting, as if expecting him to run at the last second. Amir met his eyes briefly, then looked away. His hands remained buried in his pockets, fingers curled tightly as if gripping onto something invisible. The doors closed. The sound echoed louder than it should have. The bus pulled away slowly, its red taillights glowing against the dark street. Amir watched it disappear, not blinking, not moving, as if he needed to see it until it was completely gone. As if letting it leave was something permanent. And maybe it was. A strange emptiness followed, deeper than before. Not regret. He didn't even have the energy for that. But a quiet acceptance. He had made the choice. No one forced him. No one even noticed. The street grew quieter. The small crowd at the bus stop was gone now, leaving behind only the faint hum of distant traffic and the soft flicker of Christmas lights wrapped around nearby poles. Somewhere far off, laughter echoed, warm and full of life. Amir exhaled slowly, his breath rising into the cold air before fading away. He stepped toward the bench and sat down, the metal cold beneath him. His shoulders slumped forward, his gaze fixed on the empty road where the bus had once been. Time seemed to stretch, each second heavier than the last. For the first time, he admitted it to himself. There was nothing waiting for him. No job, no message, no voice calling his name. Just silence. His chest tightened, but no tears came. Even that felt distant now, like something he used to be capable of. He leaned back slightly, staring up at the dim sky, where no stars could be seen through the city's haze. The world kept moving, celebrating, shining, but none of it reached him. It was as if he existed just outside of it, close enough to see, but too far to touch. A faint breeze passed through, carrying with it the distant sound of a bell ringing, soft, almost unnoticed. Amir closed his eyes for a moment, letting the cold settle in. And then, without fully understanding why, a thought crossed his mind. Quiet, almost fragile. Tonight? Something felt different. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it was waiting. Amir opened his eyes slowly, the faint echo of that thought still lingering in his mind. He couldn't explain it, and he didn't try to. For months, everything inside him had felt heavy, predictable, like each day was just a repetition of the last. But tonight, there was something else. Something subtle, almost unnoticeable, yet impossible to ignore. He shifted slightly on the cold bench, pulling his jacket closer around himself. The street had grown quieter now. Most people had already gone home, leaving behind only distant headlights and the soft glow of Christmas lights wrapped around poles and trees. Somewhere across the road, a shopkeeper was pulling down a shutter, the metallic clang echoing through the stillness. Amir watched it without really seeing it. His mind had begun to drift, not to the past this time, but to a strange in-between. Space. A place where thoughts didn't fully form, but feelings did. He wasn't thinking about his failures, or the job he lost, or the calls he never made. Instead, he felt paused, as if life itself had pressed a quiet button, holding everything in place. He rubbed his hands together, trying to bring warmth back into his fingers. They felt stiff, almost disconnected, like the rest of him. The cold had a way of doing that, making everything slower, quieter, distant. Footsteps approached. At first, Amir didn't pay attention. People passed by all the time, even at this hour. But these footsteps were different, not hurried, not distracted, slow, measured, intentional. They stopped near the bench. Amir glanced up briefly, more out of instinct than curiosity. A man stood there, his presence calm, almost blending into the night. He wasn't dressed in anything remarkable. Just a simple coat, dark jeans, boots worn enough to suggest they had seen their share of miles. His hair fell naturally, slightly unkempt, and his face carried a quiet stillness that didn't demand attention, but somehow held it anyway. Without saying a word, the man sat down at the other end of the bench. There was no awkwardness, no forced acknowledgement. Just two strangers sharing the same space, separated by a few feet of cold metal, and a world of unspoken thoughts. Amir looked away, his eyes returning to the empty road. But something had shifted. He could feel it, not in a dramatic way, not like a sudden jolt, but like a subtle change in the air. The kind you only notice when everything else is completely still. For a while, neither of them spoke. The city breathed quietly around them. A car passed in the distance. A faint wind rustled through a nearby tree. Somewhere far off, music played, soft, festive, distant enough to feel like it belonged to another world. Amir let out a slow breath, watching it disappear into the night. "You missed it." The voice was calm, simple, not accusing, not curious. Just stating a fact. Amir hesitated for a moment before replying. "I didn't miss it," he said quietly. "I let it go." There was no immediate response. Instead, a small pause followed, as if the words were being understood rather than judged. "Sometimes," the man said after a moment, "people do that." Amir glanced at him again, this time a little longer. There was something unusual about the way he spoke, not in the words themselves, but in how they were delivered. No pressure, no assumptions, just space. "It doesn't matter," Amir muttered, looking away again. "There's nothing waiting." For me, anyway. The words came out heavier than he expected. Not bitter, not angry, just tired. Another pause. But this one felt different. It didn't feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something. The man shifted slightly, resting his hands together, his gaze forward. "Are you sure about that?" he asked gently. Amir didn't answer right away, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure. Amir didn't answer. The question lingered in the cold air between them, heavier than it should have been. Are you sure about that? It wasn't asked with doubt or challenge, just quiet curiosity. And somehow, that made it harder to ignore. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the empty stretch of road ahead. The asphalt reflected faint streaks of colored lights from nearby decorations, making it look almost alive, like something moving beneath the surface. I used to be, Amir said after a long pause. His voice was low, almost lost in the night, but the man beside him heard it. I used to be sure about a lot of things. Another silence followed, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt like space Amir hadn't had in a long time. Space to speak without being interrupted, without being judged, without needing to pretend. I had a job, he continued, his gaze still forward. Nothing special, but it was mine. I woke up every day knowing where I had to be, what I had to do. He let out a faint breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. Funny how something so simple can feel like everything. The man beside him didn't respond. He didn't nod or interrupt. He just listened. And then it was gone, Amir said. Just like that. He snapped his fingers softly, the sound barely audible. No warning that mattered. No second chances. Just gone. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in something quieter, something heavier. At first, I told myself it was temporary, he went on, that I'd find something else. Better even. A faint shake of his head followed. I believed that. He paused, his fingers tightening together. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months. His voice dropped further, and somewhere along the way, I stopped believing it. The words settled heavily, but they didn't break him. Not this time. It was as if he had carried them for so long, they had become part of him. I stopped answering calls, he admitted. Stopped meeting people. It's easier that way. You don't have to explain anything. You don't have to see that look in their eyes. What look? The man asked softly. Amir hesitated. Pity, he said finally. Or worse. Disappointment. The wind picked up slightly, brushing. Past them, carrying a faint chill that seemed sharper now. Amir pulled his jacket tighter again, but it didn't help much. You start feeling like you're less, he continued, choosing his words carefully. Like you had something to offer once, but now. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The man beside him shifted slightly, his gaze still calm, steady. You think that's what you are now? He asked. Amir gave a quiet, humorless smile. I don't think, he said. I know. The certainty in his voice wasn't loud, but it was deep, built over time, reinforced by silence, by rejection, by the slow fading of hope. Another pause followed, but then the man spoke again, his tone unchanged, gentle but grounded. I've met people who lost everything, he said. Jobs, homes, even people they loved. He glanced briefly at Amir before looking ahead again. Some of them believed what you believe. Amir didn't react outwardly, but something in his chest shifted slightly. And some of them didn't, the man continued. Amir frowned faintly, his eyes narrowing just a little. What's the difference? He asked. The man took a small breath, as if considering the weight of the answer. Not what they lost, he said. What they decided it meant. Amir looked at him now, really looked this time. There was no arrogance in his expression, no attempt to sound wise or superior, just a quiet certainty, like someone who had lived through more than he ever spoke about. That sounds nice, Amir said after a moment. But it doesn't change reality. No, the man agreed calmly. It doesn't. Amir blinked, slightly caught off guard by the lack of argument. But it changes what you do next, the man added. The words didn't hit like a revelation. They didn't suddenly fix anything. But they didn't fade either. They stayed, settling somewhere deeper than Amir expected. For a moment, neither of them spoke again. The night continued around them, unchanged. Cars passed in the distance, lights flickered. Somewhere, laughter rose and fell. But something inside Amir felt less still, less stuck. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping just a little. I don't even know where to start, he admitted quietly. And for the first time, it didn't sound like defeat. It sounded like a question. The question hung in the air, fragile but real. I don't even know where to start. Amir hadn't meant to say it out loud. For months, he had avoided that thought, buried it under silence and routine. But now that it was out, he couldn't take it back. It sat between them, exposed, waiting. The man beside him didn't rush to answer. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his eyes lifting toward the dim sky, as if searching for something beyond the city lights. For a moment, it felt like he might not respond at all. Then he spoke. You already did. Amir frowned faintly, confused. What? Starting, the man said simply. You did it the moment you stopped pretending everything was fine. Amir let out a quiet breath, shaking his head. That doesn't feel like starting. It feels like failing. The man gave a small nod, as if acknowledging the weight of that word. Sometimes it looks the same, he said. That answer should have been frustrating, vague, useless. But it wasn't. There was something in the way he said it, something steady, grounded, that made it hard to dismiss. Amir stared ahead again, his thoughts shifting slowly, like something frozen, beginning to thaw. I used to think I had time, he admitted. That if things went wrong, I could fix them later. He swallowed slightly. Now it feels like I wasted it. The man didn't interrupt. I look at people my age, Amir continued, his voice quieter now, and they're moving forward. Careers, families, something. He paused. And I'm here, sitting at a bus stop I didn't even want to leave. His hands tightened together again, the familiar weight creeping back in. I don't even recognize myself anymore. The words landed heavier than anything he had said before. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the city in the distance. Then the man spoke again, his tone just as calm. You're not supposed to. Amir turned to him, a slight crease forming between his brows. What does that mean? It means, the man said, choosing his words carefully, that the version of you that existed before isn't the one you're becoming. Amir blinked, caught between confusion and something else he couldn't quite name. That sounds like something people say to make failure sound better, he replied quietly. The man gave a faint smile, not amused, not dismissive, just understanding. Or maybe, he said, it's something people only understand after they go through it. Amir held his gaze for a moment longer this time. There was no pressure in it, no expectation, just a quiet presence that made it easier to stay, to listen, to not pull away. You talk like you've been there, Amir said. The man looked ahead again, his expression softening slightly. I've been lost before, he said, more than once. There was something in the way he said it, not dramatic, not detailed, but real, like a truth that didn't need explanation. Amir studied him for a second, trying to piece together who this person really was. There was something familiar about him, but Amir couldn't place it. Maybe it was just the way he spoke, or the calm he carried. "Does it actually get better?" Amir asked, his voice barely above a whisper. This time, the man didn't answer immediately. He took a slow breath, his eyes drifting to the quiet street ahead, where the glow of Christmas lights reflected faintly on the pavement. "It gets different," he said finally. Amir waited, but the man didn't add anything else. "Different. How?" Amir pressed. The man glanced at him briefly, then back ahead. "Better, if you keep going," he said. "Worse, if you don't." The simplicity of it struck harder than anything complicated could have. Amir leaned back slightly, absorbing the words. "Better, if you keep going. Worse, if you don't." It sounded obvious, almost too simple, but something about it felt undeniable. He let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing just a little. "I stopped trying," he admitted. "Not all at once. Just little by little." He looked down at his hands. "It's easier that way." "I know," the man said quietly. Amir glanced at him again. There was no judgment in his voice, no disappointment, just recognition. And for some reason, that made it harder to hold on to his excuses. The cold didn't feel as sharp anymore. Or maybe he just wasn't noticing it as much. A car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminating the two of them before fading into the distance. For a moment, the light caught the man's face more clearly. Amir squinted slightly. There was something about him. Something familiar. But before he could place it, the moment passed. The light disappeared, and the night returned to its quiet stillness. Amir looked away again, but this time his thoughts weren't as heavy. They were moving. Slowly, uncertainly, but moving. And somewhere deep inside, something he hadn't felt in a long time began to stir. Not hope. Not yet. But the possibility of it. The possibility lingered, quiet but persistent, like a small ember refusing to fade. Amir shifted slightly on the bench, his eyes drifting down to the ground. For the first time in a long while, his thoughts weren't circling the same dark place. They were unsettled, not in a bad way, just unfamiliar, like something inside him had been nudged awake. Beside him, the man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. Amir didn't pay much attention at first, assuming it was a phone or maybe gloves, but then he noticed the faint curl of steam rising in the cold air. A paper cup. The man extended it toward him. "Here," he said simply. Amir blinked, slightly caught off guard. "You don't have to—" "I know," the man replied calmly. "Take it anyway." There was no insistence in his tone, no pressure, just quiet certainty. After a brief hesitation, Amir reached out and accepted it. The warmth hit his fingers instantly, seeping through his skin like something he hadn't realized he needed. He wrapped both hands around the cup, holding it carefully, almost cautiously. "Thanks," he murmured. He brought it closer, feeling the heat rise toward his face. The faint scent of coffee drifted up, simple, familiar, grounding. For a moment, he just held it there, letting the warmth settle into him. They sat in silence again. But this silence felt different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't empty. It felt shared. Amir took a small sip. The warmth spread through him slowly, reaching. Places the cold hadn't touched. Places deeper than just his hands. "You always do this?" he asked after a moment, his voice softer now. "Do what?" the man replied. "Sit with strangers," Amir said, glancing at him briefly. "Buy them coffee." The man gave a faint smile, barely visible in the dim light. "Not always," he said. "Just when it feels right?" Amir nodded slightly, though he didn't fully understand what that meant. He looked back down at the cup, watching the steam rise and disappear into the cold night. There was something strangely comforting about it, the way it existed for a moment, then faded without resistance. "Why tonight?" Amir asked quietly. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out something smaller, a folded piece of paper. He held it for a second, as if considering it, then extended it toward Amir. Amir hesitated before taking it. "What's this?" he asked. "Something to keep," the man said. Amir unfolded it slowly. The paper was simple, slightly worn at the edges. On it, written in neat, steady handwriting, were just a few words. "You're closer than you think." Amir stared at it, his brow furrowing slightly. "Closer to what?" he asked, almost instinctively. But when he looked up, the man was already standing. "I have to go," he said, his tone calm, unchanged. Amir blinked, surprised by the suddenness. "Wait." He stood up quickly, the paper still in his hand, the cup forgotten for a moment. "You didn't answer me," he said. The man paused, turning slightly back toward him. For a brief second, the light from a nearby decoration caught his face again, clearer this time. And something clicked. Amir's expression shifted, confusion giving way to recognition. Not fully formed, not certain, but enough to make his heart skip. "You're," he started, but the man simply shook his head gently, a small, almost knowing gesture. "Take care of yourself," he said. No explanation, no confirmation, just that. Then he turned and began to walk away, his steps just as calm and measured as when he had arrived. Amir stood there, frozen, watching him go. "Wait!" he called out again, louder this time. But the man didn't stop. Within seconds, he had blended into the quiet street, disappearing into the soft glow of Christmas lights and shadows. Gone. Just like that. Amir stood still, his breath visible in the cold air, his heart beating slightly faster than before. He looked down at the paper in his hand. "You're closer than you think." The words felt heavier now. Not confusing, not empty, but meaningful in a way he couldn't yet explain. He tightened his grip on the cup again, feeling its warmth, grounding himself in the moment, the bench behind him, the empty road ahead, the quiet night around him. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. And for the first time in a long time, Amir didn't feel invisible anymore. Amir stood there long after the man disappeared, his eyes fixed on the empty street as if willing him to return. But the night had already swallowed him whole, leaving behind only silence. And something Amir couldn't quite name. His grip tightened around the small piece of paper. "You're closer than you think." He read it again. And again. This time, the words didn't feel vague. They felt intentional. A slow breath escaped his lips as he looked up, scanning the quiet road, the dim lights, the empty sidewalks. It all seemed the same, but something inside him had shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to make him feel awake. His mind replayed everything, the calm voice, the quiet confidence, the way the man listened, really listened, without interrupting, without judging. The way he spoke, as if every word mattered, even the simplest ones. And then it hit him. Not like a sudden explosion of realization, but like pieces slowly falling into place. That face, that voice, the familiarity he couldn't explain before. Amir's eyes widened slightly. "No way," he whispered under his breath. He turned, around instinctively, as if the man might still be there, just out of sight. But the street remained empty. Still, the thought wouldn't leave. It couldn't be. Or could it? Amir let out a soft, almost disbelieving laugh, shaking his head, slightly. "That doesn't make sense," he murmured. But deep down, it did. Not because of fame. Not because of recognition, but because of how he made him feel. Not small, not broken, just human. Amir looked down at his hands, the same hands he had stared at countless nights before, feeling like they had nothing left to offer. But now, for some reason, they didn't look the same. They looked capable. The thought surprised him. He wasn't sure where it came from, but it stayed. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping as a strange sense of calm began to replace the heaviness that had been sitting on him for so long. The note, the conversation, the moment. It wasn't just about who that man was. It was about what he gave him. A pause, a shift, a choice. Amir glanced down the road again, where the last bus had disappeared earlier. For the first time, he didn't feel stuck watching it leave. Instead, he took a step forward, then another. The movement felt small, but real. He slipped the folded paper carefully into his pocket, pressing it down as if anchoring it there. Not as a memory, as a reminder. You're closer than you think. Closer to what? A job? A future? A different version of himself? He didn't know yet. But for the first time, he wanted to find out. The cold air brushed against his face as he began to walk, his pace slow but steady. The streets didn't feel as distant anymore. The lights didn't feel like they belonged to another world. They were his too. A car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminating him as he walked past the bus stop, the same place he had been sitting just minutes ago, feeling like he had nowhere to go. Now, he wasn't sure where he was going, but that didn't scare him the same way. Because something had changed. Not outside, inside. Amir reached the corner and paused for a moment, looking back once. The bench was empty, quiet, ordinary. But to him, it wasn't just a bench anymore. It was the place where everything had shifted. He turned forward again, taking a deeper breath this time. And then he kept walking. Not because he had everything figured out, not because life had suddenly become easy, but because for the first time in a long time, he hadn't given up. And somewhere, far behind him, unnoticed by anyone else, the night carried forward a quiet truth. The man Amir thought had changed his fate, had only reminded him that he still could. The night didn't feel as long anymore. Amir walked without rushing, his steps steady, almost cautious, as if he were relearning something he had forgotten. The cold was still there, the same biting air brushing against his face, but it didn't sink into him the way it had before. It stayed on the surface now, no longer reaching the deeper places it once did. The street slowly shifted as he moved forward. Shops gave way to quieter alleys, bright decorations fading into dim streetlights. The city's energy softened, but instead of feeling empty, it felt calm. He reached the building where he had been staying and stopped outside for a moment. The same cracked walls, the same dim entrance. Nothing had changed. And yet, he didn't hesitate the way he usually did. Before, this place felt like a reminder of everything he had lost, everything he wasn't. Tonight, it felt different. Not better, but not heavier either. Just a place. Amir stepped inside. The stairwell smelled faintly of dust and damp. Air, the weak bulb overhead flickering as he climbed. Each step echoed softly, filling the silence. He had walked these stairs countless times before, often with his head down, avoiding even his own thoughts. But tonight, his mind wasn't trying to escape. It was thinking, slowly, carefully. He reached his door and paused, his hand resting on the handle. For a brief second, that familiar hesitation returned, the quiet voice asking, "What's the Point. But it didn't stay long. He pushed the door open. The room greeted him the same way it always did. Silent, still, untouched. A small bed against the wall. A chair near the window. A table with a few scattered papers he had stopped looking at weeks ago. Nothing new. Nothing waiting. And yet, he stepped inside anyway. He closed the door behind him and stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around him. Then slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper. He opened it again, smoothing it out with his fingers. "You're closer than you think." This time, he didn't question it. He walked over to the table and cleared a small space, pushing aside the old papers, the ones filled with half-finished applications, rejected emails, reminders of attempts that never went anywhere. He stared at them for a second. Then, instead of turning away like he usually would, he sat down. The chair creaked slightly under his weight, the sound oddly grounding. Amir picked up one of the papers. His resume. He hadn't touched it in weeks. Not because he couldn't, but because he had convinced himself there was no point. He scanned it slowly, his eyes moving over the words like he was seeing them. For the first time. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't impressive. But it wasn't nothing either. A quiet breath left his lips. For the first time, he didn't feel ashamed looking at it. He felt aware. Aware of what he had done. And maybe what he could still do. He reached for a pen. It paused in his hand for a moment, hovering over the paper. That familiar doubt flickered again. Soft, persistent. What if nothing changes? His grip tightened slightly. Then another thought followed. What if something does? The pen touched the paper. A small movement. A single correction. But it was enough. Amir leaned back slightly, staring at the page. It didn't look different. Not really. But it felt different. Because this time, he hadn't walked away from it. Minutes passed. Then more. The silence of the room wasn't heavy anymore. It was focused, alive in a quiet, steady way. He made another change. Then another, each one small, each one deliberate. Hours ago, he had been sitting at a bus stop watching the last chance to go home disappear into the night. Now he was here, not waiting, not avoiding, doing something, even if it was small, even if no one saw it. Amir placed the pen down for a moment, rubbing his hands together lightly. His eyes drifted toward the window. Outside, the faint glow of Christmas lights still shimmered in the distance. For once, it didn't feel like something separate from him. It felt like part of the same world. His world. He reached into his pocket again, touching the folded note, without taking it out this time. A quiet reminder, not of who he had met, but of what he had realized. Amir leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He wasn't fixed. He wasn't suddenly successful. Nothing had magically changed. But something had begun, and sometimes that was enough. Morning arrived quietly. There was no dramatic sunrise, no sudden burst of light changing everything. Just a slow, gentle shift. The darkness fading, the city stretching awake, the cold still lingering but softer now. Amir opened his eyes. For a moment, he didn't move. He simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, letting the unfamiliar feeling settle in his chest. He had slept, not the restless, broken kind of sleep he had grown used to, but real sleep. Deep, undisturbed. It took him a second to understand why. That felt so strange. Then he remembered the bus, the bench, the man, the note. Amir sat up slowly, his gaze drifting toward the table. The papers were still there, but now they looked different. Not like failures, like unfinished work. He swung his legs off the bed and stood, stretching slightly. His body still felt tired, but it wasn't the same exhaustion. It didn't feel like something pulling him down. It felt like something he could move through. He walked over to the table. The resume lay in front of him, marked with small corrections. Notes in the margins, evidence of something he hadn't done in a long time. Effort, Amir picked it up, scanning it once more. It still wasn't perfect, but it was ready, or at least, ready enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper, opening it again. "You're closer than you think." This time, a faint smile touched his face. "Maybe," he whispered. He folded it carefully and placed it on the table, right beside his resume. Not hidden, not tucked. Away, visible, a reminder. The room was still quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a beginning. Amir grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. There was no long pause this time, no hesitation. He stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, but the city was already alive in its own quiet way. A few people walked, past, wrapped in scarves, heading somewhere. Cars moved steadily along the road. Life continuing. Amir joined it, not as a shadow, but as someone moving forward. Hours later, he found himself standing inside a small office building. Nothing impressive, no grand opportunity waiting behind polished glass doors. Just a place, a chance. He adjusted his jacket slightly, holding his papers a little tighter as he approached the desk. "I'm here about the opening," he said. His voice was steady, not perfect, but steady. The receptionist nodded, gesturing for him to wait. Amir sat down, his eyes drifting briefly to a television mounted on the wall. A familiar face appeared on the screen. A short interview clip. Calm, thoughtful, speaking about kindness, about small moments, about how even the simplest gestures can change someone's path. Amir froze. His breath caught slightly. There was no doubt now it was him, Keanu Reeves, the same calm presence, the same quiet voice, the same man who had sat beside him, like it was nothing. Amir stared for a moment longer, a mix of disbelief and something deeper settling in his chest. But then, something unexpected happened. He didn't feel overwhelmed. He didn't feel small. He didn't feel like he had been saved. Instead, he understood. It was never about who the man was. It was about what he chose to do. Sit, listen, speak. At the exact moment someone needed it. Amir looked down at his hands again. They didn't feel empty anymore. They felt, "Ready, sir." The voice pulled him back. He looked up. "They're ready to see you." Amir nodded, standing up slowly. He took one breath, then stepped forward, not knowing exactly what would happen next, not needing to, because the truth had already revealed itself. The last bus he let go of that night was never the one that mattered. The real journey had begun the moment he chose not to follow it, and the man he thought had quietly changed his fate had only done one simple thing. He reminded Amir that fate was never out of his hands. Amir walked into the room, and this time, he didn't feel invisible anymore.